Montana Territory, 1883. The wind carried the scent of snow across the plains, where the long shadows of winter stretched like hungry wolves across the golden grass. Zane Summers pulled his hat lower against the biting cold, surveying the vast emptiness from atop his dun-quarter horse. At 25, he had already seen enough of the frontier to harden any man's heart, his youthful features belying the wariness in his deep blue eyes. "Another winter alone," he muttered to himself, stroking his light stubble with a gloved hand. His broad shoulders tensed against a gust of wind as he gazed at the small cabin nestled against the foothills. Smoke curled from the chimney. His only companion these days was the fire he built each night. Zane had built his ranch with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn determination after returning from the war. The rolling S stood as testament to his belief that a man needed nothing but his own strength to survive. People were complications, liabilities in a land that took more than it gave. Love was a luxury for those behind city walls, not for those who scraped their lives from unforgiving soil and unpredictable seasons. The frontier doesn't forgive weakness, his father had told him before dying of fever 3 winters past. Zane had buried him alone, dug the frozen earth with blistered hands, and promised himself he'd never know the pain of loss again. He'd keep to himself, build his herd, and face the frontier on his terms, alone. As the first snowflakes began to fall, Zane turned his horse toward home. The approaching storm cast an ominous shadow across the Montana sky, but he had weathered worse. What he couldn't weather was the emptiness that greeted him each night, though he'd never admit it, not even to himself. 50 miles east, Daisy Walker clutched her shawl around her slender shoulders as the stagecoach rattled across the rutted trail. At 20 years old, with honey-blonde hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet and wide hazel eyes that took in every detail of the untamed landscape, she was a vision of determined youth. Her blue calico dress, though wrinkled from days of travel, was neat and well-made, speaking to the care she took with her appearance even on this arduous journey. "Not much further to Helena, miss," the driver called down. "Though this storm's brewing faster than I'd like." Daisy nodded, forcing a smile despite her apprehension. The death of her parents 6 months prior had left her with few options in Boston: marry her father's business partner, a man 30 years her senior, or seek a new beginning. She had chosen the latter, answering her uncle's invitation to join him in Montana Territory. "A fresh start," she whispered to herself, touching the locket at her throat. Inside was a miniature portrait of her parents, the only remnant of her former life, a chance to build something of my own. What that something might be, she wasn't certain. Her uncle's letters spoke of opportunity in the growing territory, of a need for educated young women to teach or perhaps open businesses of their own. Independence beckoned, a concept both thrilling and terrifying for a young woman raised in society's careful confines. The stagecoach lurched suddenly, throwing Daisy against the opposite seat. A crack like thunder split the air, followed by the driver's panicked shouts. The vehicle tilted precariously, and Daisy barely had time to brace herself before it crashed onto its side, sending her tumbling against the hard wooden wall. Pain shot through her temple as darkness closed in around the edges of her vision. Through the haze, she heard the frightened whinny of horses and the driver's cursing. Then came the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats retreating rapidly. "Hello," she called weakly, struggling to right herself in the overturned coach. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, broken only by the growing howl of wind. With trembling hands, Daisy touched her forehead, her fingers coming away red with blood. The realization settled over her like the snowflakes now drifting through the broken window. She was alone, injured in an unfamiliar wilderness as a blizzard approached. The sun was sinking fast when Zane spotted the overturned stagecoach. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks. The coach route rarely came this far north, but as he approached, the reality of the situation became clear. The coach lay on its side, one wheel completely shattered, no driver or horses in sight. "Hello," he called, dismounting cautiously. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip. Outlaws were known to stage accidents to lure in unsuspecting travelers. "Anyone alive in there?" A faint sound reached his ears, a woman's voice, weak but determined. Zane approached the coach, peering through the broken window to see a young woman struggling to free herself from the jumble of luggage and broken wood. "Hold still," he instructed, working to pry open the door that now faced the sky. "I'll get you out." With a powerful heave, he forced the door open and extended his hand. "Can you reach?" Daisy looked up at the stranger silhouetted against the darkening sky, broad-shouldered and tall, with a cowboy hat pulled low over his face. Despite her predicament, she hesitated. Her entire life she'd been warned about the dangers of the frontier, about men who preyed on vulnerable women. The driver, she said instead, and the other passengers. No one else here, Zane replied, his voice gruff but not unkind. And a storm's coming, take my hand or freeze to death, your choice. The practicality of his words broke through her hesitation. Daisy reached up, feeling his strong grip as he pulled her effortlessly from the wreckage. Once on solid ground, her knees buckled, and he caught her before she could fall. You're hurt, he observed, noting the blood on her temple and the way she favored her right ankle. It's nothing, she insisted, though her vision swam alarmingly. I need to get to Helena. My uncle. Helena's still 20 miles south, Zane interrupted, and that's the worst blizzard of the season bearing down on us. He nodded toward the ominous wall of clouds rapidly approaching from the north. My ranch is 3 miles west, it's your only chance. Daisy straightened, attempting to reclaim some dignity despite her disheveled appearance. I don't even know your name, sir. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Zane Summers. Rolling S Ranch. Daisy Walker, she replied, wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. I appreciate your assistance, Mr. Summers, but I cannot simply. Her words were cut short as a powerful gust of wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Zane steadied her, his expression brooking no argument. Miss Walker, in about 30 minutes, this entire valley will be whiteout conditions. You can either come with me now, or I can come back in spring to bury what's left of you. The bluntness of his assessment shocked her, but Daisy recognized the truth in his words. With a nod, she allowed him to help her to his horse. My things. We'll salvage what we can, he promised, quickly retrieving a small carpetbag and what appeared to be a lady's trunk. He secured them to his saddle before lifting her onto the horse's back with surprising gentleness. Hold tight. Zane swung up behind her, one arm securing her against his chest as he turned the horse toward his ranch. The first heavy snowflakes were already beginning to fall, driven sideways by the strengthening wind. Daisy felt the solid warmth of him at her back, the steady beat of his heart a counterpoint to her own racing pulse. Despite her predicament, injured, dependent on a stranger, miles from her destination, she felt oddly secure in his embrace. Thank you, she said, her words nearly lost in the wind. He didn't respond, but his arm tightened slightly around her waist as they rode into the gathering storm. By the time they reached the small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, visibility had dropped to mere feet. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, the temperature plummeting with each passing minute. Zane practically carried Daisy into the cabin, setting her gently on a chair near the banked fireplace. Stay put, he instructed, before heading back out to care for his horse and retrieve her belongings. Alone in the stranger's home, Daisy took stock of her surroundings. The cabin was simple but solid, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves lined with provisions. Everything spoke of utility rather than comfort, yet there was an undeniable tidiness to the space. No dirty dishes, no scattered clothing, just the bare necessities meticulously maintained. Zane returned in a flurry of snow and wind, bringing her trunk and bag before securing the door against the howling storm. Without ceremony, he moved to the fireplace, adding logs and stoking the flames until warmth began to radiate through the small space. You should get out of those wet clothes, he said matter-of-factly, still focused on the fire. I'll turn my back. Daisy felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the growing fire. Mr. Summers, I hardly think. You can keep your undergarments on, he interrupted, his tone clinical rather than suggestive, but wet clothing in this cold leads to sickness. Sickness out here can be a death sentence. The practicality of his logic was undeniable, yet Daisy hesitated. This wasn't Boston with its rigid social conventions and constant chaperones. This was survival. Could you assist me with my trunk? She asked finally. I have a nightdress and robe that would be more appropriate. Zane nodded, bringing her trunk to the bedside before retreating to face the wall. With trembling fingers, Daisy managed to unfasten her sodden dress and replace it with her flannel nightdress and woolen robe. The entire time Zane remained motionless, his back to her, a courtesy she hadn't expected from a frontier rancher. I'm decent, she announced once finished. He turned, appraising her injury rather than her attire. Let me look at that cut. Before she could protest, he had retrieved a small box from a shelf and was kneeling before her. With surprising gentleness, he cleaned the blood from her temple with a damp cloth. Not as bad as it looked, he murmured. Head wounds bleed something fierce, but this won't need stitching. Are you a doctor, Mr. Summers? Daisy asked, trying to distract herself from his proximity. A humorless smile touched his lips. No, ma'am, just a man who's learned to patch himself up when there's no one else to do it. The statement carried a loneliness that caught her attention. You live here alone. By choice, he replied, applying a salve to her cut. His fingers were calloused but gentle against her skin. The frontier isn't kind to those who rely on others. Yet you're helping me, she observed. Zane's hands paused momentarily as if her words had caught him off guard. That's different. No one deserves to die in a blizzard. Is that the only reason? His blue eyes met hers briefly before he returned to his task. What other reason would there be? The question hung between them as the storm intensified outside, rattling the cabin's sturdy walls. Daisy had no answer, at least none she was prepared to voice to this enigmatic man who'd saved her life yet clearly wished to keep his distance. How long will the storm last? She asked instead. Zane stood, returning the medical supplies to their place. Hard to say, could be days, could be weeks. Weeks, alarm colored her voice, but my uncle is expecting me. He'll be worried. No one travels in this weather, Miss Walker, not if they want to live. He moved to the small stove in the corner, adding wood before placing a pot of water to heat. Your uncle will understand. Folk out here know what winter means. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Daisy was effectively stranded with this stranger until the weather broke, a situation that would have been unthinkable in her previous life. Yet as she watched him efficiently prepare a simple meal, she felt oddly at ease. Despite his gruff manner, Zane Summers had shown her nothing but respect and consideration. I'll not be a burden, she said suddenly, straightening her shoulders. I can cook, clean, mend, I'll earn my keep while I'm here. Zane glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. Didn't take you for the domestic type, Miss Walker. You seem more Boston finishing school. I am both, Mr. Summers, she replied with dignity. My mother believed a woman should be accomplished in all aspects of household management, regardless of her station. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough, but for tonight you rest. That ankle needs tending too. As the storm buried them inside the cowboy's shelter, Daisy heard him say, I'll protect you until spring if need be. The words were spoken quietly, almost to himself, as he stirred the pot of stew. Yet in that moment, watching his strong profile against the firelight, Daisy felt something stir within her, a recognition that perhaps her detour was not merely misfortune but destiny. Days passed, the storm showing no sign of abating. The world outside the cabin was transformed into a white wilderness, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Inside, an unexpected routine developed between the reluctant host and his unexpected guest. Zane rose before dawn each day to tend his livestock, returning with fresh milk and eggs when the weather permitted him to reach the small barn. Despite his initial reluctance, he found himself appreciating Daisy's presence. She was unfailingly cheerful, turning simple meals into pleasant occasions with her conversation and genuine interest in his life. How did you come to Montana? She asked one evening as they sat before the fire, the wind howling outside like a living thing. You don't speak like a man born to the frontier. Zane considered deflecting the question as he had others, but something in her attentive gaze made him answer truthfully. I was born in Virginia. My father brought us west after the war, said there was nothing left for people like us back east. People like you. Confederates, he said plainly, watching for her reaction, though I was too young to fight. My older brothers weren't so fortunate. Daisy's expression remained open, free of judgment, and they both died at Gettysburg. The words still burned even after all these years. My father never recovered from it. Brought me west to start fresh, but the grief followed him, drank himself to death 3 years ago. I'm sorry, she said softly, her hand briefly touching his arm, a gesture so natural it surprised them both. Loss changes us, doesn't it? The understanding in her voice caught him off guard. Your parents. She nodded, her honey blonde hair catching the firelight. Influenza 6 months ago. It took them both within days of each other. That's why you're heading to your uncle. Partly, Daisy admitted, though it was also to escape a marriage arrangement my father's partner was rather insistent upon. He believed that by marrying me, he could secure my father's portion of the business. Anger flashed across Zane's features, a man your father's age. Older, in fact, she said with a small smile at his reaction. I chose the frontier instead.
Brave choice.
Or desperate, she countered, her honesty disarming. But I believe there's more to life than security bought at the price of one's happiness. Zane studied her, seeing beyond the refined exterior to the strength beneath. The frontier tests that belief, Miss Walker. It takes more than it gives most days. Perhaps you've been taking the wrong measurements, Mr.
Summers.
The challenge in her words lingered between them, unanswered but not unacknowledged. That night, as Zane lay on his makeshift pallet by the fire, having insisted Daisy take the bed, he found himself considering her perspective. Had he been measuring his life by what he'd lost rather than what remained? The thought was uncomfortable enough that he pushed it away, focusing instead on the practical concerns of surviving the winter. Yet each day, as Daisy's ankle healed and she moved more freely around the cabin, Zane found it harder to maintain the emotional distance that had defined his existence. She brought life to spaces that had known only utility, flowers arranged in a tin can on the table, bread baking in the oven, laughter filling corners that had known only silence. "You don't have to do all this," he said one morning, returning from the barn to find her hanging freshly washed curtains she'd fashioned from spare fabric. "I know," she replied simply. "I want to." "A home should feel lived in, don't you think?" Home, the word struck him oddly. He'd never thought of the cabin as more than shelter, a place to sleep and eat between the work of the ranch. Yet seeing it through her eyes, he began to recognize what was missing. The blizzard continued relentlessly, days stretching into weeks. January gave way to February, and still the snow piled high around the cabin. They fell into routines that felt surprisingly natural, Zane handling the outdoor chores, Daisy maintaining their indoor sanctuary. In the evenings, they would read from his small collection of books, play checkers with a set he'd carved years ago, or simply talk. It was during one such evening that their carefully maintained boundaries began to blur. Daisy had been attempting to mend one of Zane's shirts, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked a particularly stubborn tear. "You're holding the needle wrong," he observed, setting aside the knife he'd been sharpening. Daisy looked up, surprise evident in her hazel eyes. "I wasn't aware there was a wrong way to hold a needle, Mr. Summers." "There is when you're mending buckskin," he replied, rising from his chair to kneel beside hers.
May I?
At her nod, he gently took her hands in his, repositioning her fingers on the needle. "Like this, you need to get under the grain, not across it." The proximity was sudden and intimate, his breath warm against her cheek, his calloused hands engulfing her smaller ones. Daisy found herself acutely aware of him in a way that transcended their daily interactions. The clean scent of his soap, the slight roughness of his stubbled jaw, the surprising gentleness of his touch. "I see," she murmured, though her attention had little to do with the mending technique and everything to do with the man beside her. Zane seemed to realize their position at the same moment, his blue eyes lifting to meet hers. For a heartbeat, neither moved, caught in an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension that had been building between them for weeks. "Daisy," he said, her given name unfamiliar on his tongue after weeks of formal address. The sound of it sent a tremor through her. "Yes," she whispered, unconsciously leaning closer. The moment shattered as a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the cabin, causing the door to rattle ominously. Zane withdrew, the mask of pragmatic rancher sliding back into place as he rose to check the latch. "Storm's getting worse again," he observed, his back to her as he peered through the small window. "Might need to check on the livestock earlier than usual tomorrow." Daisy felt the loss of connection like a physical thing but respected his retreat. "I'll have breakfast ready before dawn." He nodded, still not looking at her. "Thank you." That night sleep eluded them both, each acutely aware of the other's presence in the small cabin, each wrestling with feelings that defied the boundaries they'd established. For Zane, the realization was particularly unsettling. He had built his life around independence, around the belief that attachment only led to pain. Yet in a few short weeks, Daisy Walker had become essential to his days. Her smile at breakfast, her questions about ranch life, her quiet humming as she worked, all had become threads in the fabric of his existence. The prospect of her eventual departure left an emptiness he wasn't prepared to face. Morning arrived with a surprising break in the storm, a false spring common to Montana winters. Sunshine sparkled across the endless expanse of snow, and the wind died to a gentle whisper. "It's beautiful," Daisy breathed, standing at the door as Zane prepared for his morning chores. "Deceptive," he warned, pulling on his heavy coat. "These breaks rarely last. Best to enjoy it while we can, though." An idea formed in her mind. Could we enjoy it? I mean, my ankle's much better and I've been inside for weeks. Zane studied her eager expression, finding it impossible to refuse. I suppose a short walk wouldn't hurt. Bundle up proper, though. The cold's still bitter, sun or no. Daisy's delight was worth any inconvenience. She dressed quickly in layers borrowed from Zane's sparse wardrobe, looking comically small in his spare coat but determined nonetheless. When they stepped outside, the contrast between the cabin's warmth and the winter air made her gasp, her breath a white cloud before her. It's like a different world, she marveled, taking in the transformed landscape. Snow blanketed everything, smoothing the rough edges of the frontier into soft, rolling contours. The distant mountains stood stark against the blue sky, majestic and eternal. Come on, Zane said, offering his arm for stability. I'll show you the view from the ridge. They walked slowly, Zane carefully guiding her through the knee-deep snow. Despite the cold, Daisy felt a sense of freedom after weeks of confinement. The sun on her face, the crisp air in her lungs, the solid presence of the man beside her, all combined to create a perfect moment of contentment. At the top of a small ridge overlooking the valley, Zane paused. This is why I stay, he said simply, gesturing toward the panorama before them. The rolling S spread below, a modest homestead, but with potential visible even beneath the snow. A small herd of cattle huddled in a sheltered canyon, the barn and corrals neat and well-maintained. It's wonderful, Daisy said sincerely. You've built something meaningful here.
It's not much compared to city life. She turned to face him, her expression earnest.
It's everything, Zane. It's freedom and purpose and creation all at once. Don't diminish what you've accomplished. The use of his given name wasn't lost on him, nor was the genuine admiration in her voice. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of mutual respect that transcended their different backgrounds. What will you do in Helena? He asked suddenly, the question that had haunted him for weeks finally finding voice. Daisy looked out across the valley, considering. My uncle has arranged a teaching position at the new school. It's respectable work for a woman alone.
Is that what you want to teach?
It's what's available, she replied honestly. Women have limited options, even in the territories. Zane studied her profile against the winter landscape, seeing the strength and intelligence that society so often overlooked. You deserve more than limited options. Their eyes met, and for a moment, words seemed inadequate. The connection between them had grown from necessity into something neither had anticipated, something neither was quite ready to name. The moment was broken by a distant sound, the unmistakable report of a rifle echoing across the valley. Zane's posture changed instantly, alert and protective as he scanned the surroundings. We need to get back, he said, his voice low and urgent. Now.
What is it? Daisy asked, sensing his tension.
Trouble, he took her arm, guiding her back toward the cabin with greater speed than their outward journey. Rifle fire this time of year means either poachers or something worse.
Worse?
Road agents, outlaws. Men who see isolated homesteads as easy targets during winter. The fear in his voice was not for himself, Daisy realized, but for her. The knowledge warmed her despite the danger, even as they hurried through the deep snow toward the safety of the cabin. They had almost reached the yard when 3 riders appeared on the ridge they'd just left. Zane pushed Daisy behind him instinctively, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Get inside, he ordered quietly. Bar the door. I won't leave you out here alone, she protested. Daisy, the intensity in his eyes brooked no argument. Please.
Something in his expression convinced her.
With a nod, she hurried toward the cabin as Zane turned to face the approaching riders. From the doorway, she watched as the 3 men drew closer, rough-looking individuals with the hard eyes of men accustomed to violence. Afternoon, the leader called, his voice carrying across the yard. Fine day after all that snow.
Zane remained silent, his stance deceptively relaxed, though Daisy could see the tension in his shoulders.
Not much for conversation, are you? The man continued, dismounting with calculated slowness. We've been riding hard, lost our supplies in that last blizzard, thought you might be neighborly enough to share. There's a trading post 20 miles south, Zane replied evenly. I'd be happy to point you in that direction. The leader laughed, an unpleasant sound. Now why would we ride all that way when you've got everything we need right here? His eyes flicked toward the cabin, where Daisy stood half-hidden in the doorway.
Everything indeed.
The implication was unmistakable. Zane's hand hovered near his weapon. I think you'd best move on. "3 against 1, Cowboy," the second man observed, also dismounting. "Bad odds." "Depends on the one," Zane replied, his voice deadly calm. "Last chance to ride away intact." The leader's expression hardened. "I don't much care for threats." "It wasn't a threat," Zane said. "It was a fact." What happened next unfolded with startling speed. The leader went for his gun, but Zane was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. The man fell backward, a look of surprise frozen on his face. The second outlaw managed to get a shot off, the bullet splintering wood near Zane's shoulder before Zane's return fire found its mark. The third man, seeing his companions fall, hesitated only momentarily before spurring his horse in retreat. Zane let him go, attention already turning toward the cabin. Daisy. She emerged, pale but steady, a rifle from the cabin wall in her hands. "I'm all right." Zane crossed to her in 3 long strides, checking her for injury despite her assurances. His hands trembled slightly as they framed her face. "I thought, when that shot hit the cabin." "It missed," she said softly, setting aside the rifle to place her hands over his. "I'm unharmed." The relief in his eyes gave way to something deeper, more primal. Without words, he pulled her against him, his arms encircling her with desperate need. Daisy returned the embrace, her face pressed against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you," he confessed, the words rough with emotion. Daisy looked up at him, seeing the walls crumbling behind his eyes. "Nothing happened, I'm here." "For now," he said, the words containing all his fear of eventual loss. "Until the road's clear." The moment hung between them, his fear of attachment laid bare, her hope for something more than temporary shelter made plain in her steady gaze. "The third man will likely return with others," Zane said finally, practical concerns reasserting themselves. "We need to prepare." The aftermath of the attack brought a new tension to their sheltered existence. Zane reinforced the cabin windows, kept the horses saddled for quick escape if needed, and insisted on taking watch through the nights despite Daisy's concerns for his rest. "You can't stay awake indefinitely," she argued 3 nights later, finding him still seated by the window, rifle across his knees. "Let me take a turn." "I'm fine," he insisted, though the shadows beneath his eyes told a different story. "You're not," Daisy countered, kneeling beside his chair. "You're exhausted, and exhaustion leads to mistakes." The practical logic of her argument penetrated his stubbornness. With reluctance, he nodded. 2 hours. "Then wake me." 4 hours, she negotiated. "I'll wake you at the slightest sound." Too tired to argue further, Zane surrendered the watch. As he stretched out on his pallet, he found himself watching Daisy take her position by the window, her slender profile outlined against the night. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. "Why did you really come west?" he asked, the question emerging from the shadows between them. Daisy didn't turn from her vigil. "I told you. To escape an unwanted marriage, to reach my uncle." "There's more," he insisted softly. "I can see it in your eyes sometimes, a restlessness that goes beyond circumstance." The perceptiveness of his observation surprised her. Daisy was silent for a long moment before answering. "I wanted to write my own story," she admitted. "In Boston, every page was already determined, who I would marry, how I would live, what was expected. I wanted blank pages I could fill myself. Even knowing how harsh those pages might be. Especially then," she turned to meet his gaze across the darkened room. "What's the use of a safe story no one remembers? I'd rather risk everything for a chance at something extraordinary." The honesty of her answer resonated deep within him. Zane had come west for similar reasons, to escape the predetermined path of a defeated Southerner, to build something that belonged solely to him. Yet somewhere along the way, he'd confused isolation with independence. "Get some sleep," Daisy said gently, returning her attention to the window. "I'll keep watch." Despite his intentions to remain alert, exhaustion claimed him. He drifted into the deepest sleep he'd known in days, lulled by the knowledge that she was near. Morning came with no sign of returning outlaws, though neither Zane nor Daisy lowered their guard. The fall spring had given way to renewed snow, lighter than before but steady, adding fresh inches to the already substantial drifts. As February waned, a new rhythm developed between them, one marked by heightened awareness of danger but also deepening connection. The barriers Zane had maintained so carefully continued to erode in the face of Daisy's quiet strength and unwavering presence. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Daisy mending a torn shirt while Zane cleaned his revolver, she broached the subject they'd been avoiding. The snow will melt eventually, she said, her eyes on her needlework. Spring always comes. Zane's hands stilled on his weapon. Yes. My uncle will be worried. I should reach Helena as soon as the roads permit. The practical truth of her words couldn't be denied, yet Zane felt something tighten in his chest at the thought of her departure. Of course. Daisy set aside her mending, gathering her courage. Unless. He looked up, meeting her gaze across the small space between them. Unless there was reason to stay. The implication hung in the air between them, a question, an invitation, a possibility neither had dared voice until now. Zane set aside his revolver, moving to kneel before her chair, his blue eyes earnest as they searched her face. Daisy, I have nothing to offer but a hard life on a small ranch. No comforts, no certainties beyond what we make with our own hands. She reached out, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. You offer everything that matters, purpose, partnership. A chance to build something meaningful together. People will talk, he warned. A respectable Boston lady living with a rancher she barely knows. A smile touched her lips. I think I know you better than most people who have spent years in each other's company, and as for respectability, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, I find I care less for it with each passing day. The last of Zane's resistance crumbled. With tender hesitation, he closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. Daisy's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as she returned his kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Zane rested his forehead against hers. I never thought to find this, he confessed, never thought to want it. Nor I, she admitted. But now I cannot imagine any other path. Their newfound understanding transformed the cabin into something it had never been before, truly a home, filled with shared dreams and quiet joy despite the continuing danger and isolation. February gave way to March, the snow beginning to recede from south-facing slopes even as winter maintained its grip on the shadowed valleys. It was during this transition, winter loosening its hold but spring not yet fully arrived, that their fragile peace was shattered. Zane returned from checking his cattle to find hoofprints in the melting snow near the cabin, evidence of riders who had approached while he was away. Heart pounding, he rushed inside, relief flooding him at the sight of Daisy unharmed, though her expression was troubled. 3 men came, she explained before he could ask. They didn't attempt to enter, just asked questions. About you, about me, about how long I'd been here. What did you tell them? Only that I was stranded by the storm, that you had offered shelter. They seemed official somehow, not like the outlaws before. Zane's expression darkened. Badges. One of them, he said he was a deputy marshal. The news settled like a stone in Zane's stomach. He moved to the window, scanning the surrounding landscape as if expecting immediate pursuit. Did they say they'd return? No, but the one with the badge, he knew your name. Asked if you were Zane Summers, formerly of Virginia. When I confirmed it, he seemed satisfied somehow. Zane's shoulders slumped, a defeat in his posture that Daisy hadn't seen before. She crossed to him, placing a hand on his arm. Zane, what is it? What aren't you telling me? He couldn't meet her eyes. There are things about my past, things I haven't shared. Tell me now, she said quietly. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. The trust in her voice nearly undid him. With reluctance, Zane led her to the table, both of them sitting as he gathered his courage to speak truth he'd buried for years. After the war, when my father brought us west, we didn't come directly to Montana. We settled first in Kansas, trying to farm land that wasn't meant for it. He paused, memories darkening his expression. There was a dispute with neighboring homesteaders, Union men who resented Southerners moving into the territory. Words led to threats, threats to violence. Daisy's hand found his across the table. Go on. One night they came, 4 of them, drunk and armed. My father was in town, just me and my mother at home. His voice grew distant. They said they were going to burn us out, teach rebels a lesson. My mother tried to reason with them, but they put hands on her. I had my father's revolver. I was 17, scared out of my mind. You protected your mother, Daisy said softly, understanding dawning. Zane nodded, still not meeting her eyes. 2 of them died, the others fled. My father returned to find me standing over their bodies, my mother sobbing on the porch. We left that night, traveled north and west, never staying anywhere long enough to be recognized. Eventually found this place, remote enough that no one asked questions. But the law never forgot, Daisy concluded. I killed 2 men, Zane said flatly. Self-defense or not, there would have been a trial at minimum. And in that part of Kansas, after the war, a Southern boy who shot Union men wouldn't have received justice, just a rope. Silence settled between them as Daisy absorbed his confession. Zane waited for judgment, for the disgust or fear he was certain would follow. Instead, she tightened her grip on his hand. You did what anyone would have done to protect family, she said firmly. I cannot fault you for that, nor can any person of conscience. The acceptance in her voice broke something loose inside him, a burden he'd carried alone for too many years. The law might see it differently. If that was truly a deputy marshal, then we have decisions to make, Daisy said practically. How soon can they return? The shift in her language wasn't lost on him. Not you, but we. Days, perhaps. Depends on whether they're merely investigating or have specific orders. Then we use those days wisely. Her mind worked rapidly, considering options. You could leave, find somewhere more remote. Alaska perhaps, or Canada. And you? Daisy met his gaze directly. I go where you go, if you'll have me. The declaration, so simply stated yet profound in its implications, struck Zane speechless. After a moment he found his voice. You would leave everything, your plans, your uncle, the security of a teaching position, to follow a fugitive. I would follow the man I love, she corrected. The rest is circumstance. Love, the word hung between them, both powerful and fragile. Zane rose, moving around the table to draw her into his arms. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her hair. Thankfully, love isn't about deserving, she replied, her arms tightening around him. It's about choosing, and I choose you, Zane Summers, past and all. That night, as they lay together in the narrow bed, propriety abandoned in the face of uncertain future, they made plans in whispered conversation. They would gather what they could carry, head north into Canada before the marshal and his deputies returned. It would mean leaving behind all Zane had built, starting again from nothing in a foreign land. Yet as he held Daisy against his heart, listening to her breathe in the darkness, he knew the sacrifice was insignificant compared to what he would gain. Morning brought renewed purpose as they began preparations for departure. Zane rode out to round up what cattle he could sell quickly to a neighboring rancher, while Daisy organized essential supplies for their journey. The urgency of their task was underscored by the knowledge that each hour might bring law enforcement back to their door. It was mid-afternoon when Zane returned, his expression grim as he dismounted in the yard. Riders coming, he said without preamble. 6, maybe 7, still a few miles out, but heading this way. Daisy's heart sank. The marshal. Can't tell from this distance, but it seems likely. He began gathering the last of their provisions. We need to leave now, head north through the foothills. There's a trail that's passable this time of year if you know where to look. They worked with desperate efficiency, loading 2 horses with their essential belongings. As Daisy secured the last pack, a movement on the distant ridge caught her attention. Zane, she called, pointing toward the approaching dust cloud. The riders were closer than expected, moving at a determined pace. He assessed their options rapidly. Too late to outrun them, we'll have to face this. What if you're arrested? Fear edged her voice for the first time. Zane's expression hardened with resolve. Then I'll stand trial, tell the truth of what happened, but I'll not spend my life running, not when I finally have something worth standing for. The decision made, they waited on the cabin porch as the riders approached. As they drew nearer, Daisy could make out the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest, the deputy marshal from before, accompanied by what appeared to be a posse. Stay behind me, Zane instructed quietly. Let me do the talking. The riders reined in before the cabin, the marshal assessing the packed horses with knowing eyes. Planning a trip, Summers. Spring roundup, Zane replied evenly. Checking the high pastures. The marshal dismounted, his movements deliberate. Quite a coincidence. I was just in Helena speaking with a Mr. James Walker about his missing niece. His eyes shifted to Daisy. Seems she was expected months ago, never arrived. Daisy stepped forward despite Zane's attempt to keep her behind him. My uncle is here. Not presently, ma'am, but he's mighty concerned. When word reached him about a stagecoach accident and a young woman taken in by a rancher out this way, he was most interested. Relief flooded her at the news her uncle was aware of her situation, quickly followed by confusion. If you've spoken with my uncle, then you know my presence here was circumstance, not choice. The storm. I'm not here about your living arrangements, ma'am, the marshal interrupted, though they are somewhat irregular. I'm here about him, he nodded toward Zane. Zane Summers, formerly of Whitfield County, Kansas. Zane straightened, preparing for the worst. If you're here to arrest me for what happened there, I won't resist. But I ask that you ensure Miss Walker reaches her uncle safely. The marshal studied him for a long moment. Interesting you should mention arrest. I've got papers here from Kansas. He reached into his coat, withdrawing an official-looking document. Been carrying them a while, looking for the right Zane Summers. Tension radiated from Zane as he awaited his fate. Daisy moved closer to his side, her hand finding his in silent support. The marshal unfolded the paper. By order of the District Court of Whitfield County, Kansas, the case against Zane Summers in the matter of the deaths of Elijah Tanner and Samuel Boone is hereby closed. Witness testimony confirms acts of self-defense in protection of family. No charges to be filed or pursued. The words seemed to hang in the air, incomprehensible at first. Zane stared at the marshal, disbelief evident in his expression. What witnesses? There were none but my mother and she. Past 3 years back, I know, the marshal said, his tone softening slightly. But before she did, she gave sworn testimony to a circuit judge. That, combined with later accounts from the surviving attackers, who eventually faced justice for other crimes, was enough to clear your name. Cleared, Zane repeated, the word foreign to his ears after so many years of looking over his shoulder. I'm not wanted. Not by the law, at least. The marshal refolded the document, extending it toward Zane. Thought you should have this. Peace of mind is worth something in this territory. With trembling hands, Zane accepted the paper, reading the legal language that granted him freedom from a past he'd believed inescapable. Beside him, Daisy's grip on his hand tightened, her joy palpable even as she remained silent, allowing him this moment of revelation. Why now? Zane asked finally. Why track me down after all this time? The marshal shrugged. Justice moves slow, but it generally gets there. When I heard about a Zane Summers in this region, about the right age and background, figured I'd deliver the news personally. Then when Mr. Walker came looking for his niece and mentioned where she might be, he glanced between them, a knowing look in his weathered eyes. Seemed like an opportunity to settle multiple matters at once. Daisy found her voice at last. My uncle, is he well? Will you tell him I'm safe? Better than that, the marshal replied. He's in Benton, waiting for word. I can escort you there once you're ready to travel. She looked at Zane, a question in her eyes that had nothing to do with practicalities and everything to do with their future. His response was immediate and certain, drawing her closer to his side before addressing the marshal. We'd be grateful for your escort, but there's something I need to do first. He turned to face Daisy fully, both her hands now clasped in his. I had planned to ask this under different circumstances, perhaps when we were safely across the border. But now that my past is no longer hunting me, I can offer you a future here if you want it. Understanding dawned in Daisy's expression, her eyes brightening with unshed tears. Daisy Walker, Zane continued, dropping to one knee before her, heedless of their audience. These past months have taught me that a man is not made for solitude, no matter what he tells himself. You've brought light to dark places, purpose where there was only existence. I love you and I want to build a life with you, here, on this land that's finally truly mine to claim. Tears spilled freely down Daisy's cheeks as she looked down at the man who had saved her from the storm and in doing so had saved himself from a lifetime of isolation. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Zane Summers. I will marry you and build that life together. The marshal cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. Well now, this is becoming more complicated than a simple escort mission. Despite his gruff tone, there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. I suppose congratulations are in order. Spring arrived in full glory, melting the last remnants of snow from the valley and bringing new growth to the land. The rolling S Ranch buzzed with activity as neighbors gathered to witness the union of Zane Summers and Daisy Walker beneath an arch of wildflowers beside the cabin that had sheltered them through the winter. James Walker had traveled from Helena to give his niece away, his initial concerns about her hasty engagement eased by the evident devotion between the couple and the respect Zane commanded among his neighbors. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the gathering modest but heartfelt as the community welcomed its newest official member. As the celebration continued into evening, Zane led his bride away from the festivities toward the ridge where they had stood months before, watching the winter landscape. Now wildflowers carpeted the hillside and the valley below teemed with new life. Happy? He asked, his arm around her waist as they surveyed what was now their shared domain. Daisy leaned into him, her wedding ring catching the last rays of sunset. Beyond words, though I still maintain getting trapped in a blizzard was an unorthodox way to find a husband. Zane laughed, the sound free in a way it hadn't been before her arrival in his life. I prefer to think of it as the storm that brought me home, even though I never left my land. Home is not a place, Daisy said softly, turning in his arms to face him. It's the people who wait there who make the waiting worthwhile. As darkness fell over the Montana wilderness, Zane Summers held his bride close, grateful for the storm that had buried them inside his shelter, for the words he'd spoken. I'll protect you until spring, and for the lifetime of springs that now stretched before them, full of promise and possibility on the frontier they would tame together.